Caiaphas, the man who sent Jesus to the cross, became a believer himself. This isn't just speculation, it's backed by evidence that's been hiding in plain sight for centuries. Get ready to have your mind blown as we uncover the ancient prophecy that predicted Caiaphas' role in Jesus' death and his shocking conversion afterward. The pieces of this 2,000-year-old puzzle are finally falling into place, and you won't want to miss a single detail. You won't believe what's just been uncovered in the Dead Sea Scrolls. A prophecy so ancient and so precise, it's sending shockwaves through the biblical scholar community. This isn't just any prediction. It's a detailed forecast of Caiaphas, the high priest who played a pivotal role in Jesus' crucifixion. But here's the kicker. It also foretells something about Caiaphas that no one saw coming. For centuries, this prophecy lay hidden among the cryptic texts of the Dead Sea Scrolls. Scholars pored over these ancient documents, but somehow this particular prediction slipped through the cracks. It wasn't until a team of researchers, using advanced imaging technology, stumbled upon a previously illegible fragment that the full scope of this prophecy came to light. Now here's where it gets really interesting. Biblical scholars are deeply divided over the interpretation of this newfound text. Some argue it's a clear and unmistakable prophecy about Caiaphas, while others claim it's too vague to pin down to any specific individual. The debate is fierce, with reputations and long-held beliefs on the line. But let me paint you a picture of what this prophecy actually says. It speaks of a man who will rise to the highest priestly office, a man of great influence and wealth. This figure will be caught between the demands of his faith and the pressures of a foreign power. The prophecy describes in vivid detail a pivotal decision this priest will make, one that will shape the course of history. And it doesn't stop there. In language that's both poetic and chilling, the prophecy goes on to describe a profound transformation. It speaks of scales falling from eyes, of a heart of stone becoming flesh. The implications are staggering. Dr. Sarah Levinson, a leading expert on the Dead Sea Scrolls, weighs in. This text is unlike anything we've seen before. The level of specificity, the alignment with historical events, it's unprecedented. If this prophecy is indeed about Caiaphas, it forces us to reconsider everything we thought we knew about predestination and free will in biblical contexts. But here's where the prophecy takes an unexpected turn. It doesn't just stop at predicting Caiaphas' role in a famous trial. No, it goes further, hinting at a shocking event that would occur after the crucifixion, an event that, if true, would shake the very foundations of early Christianity. As we dig deeper into the prophecy, the connections to Jesus become impossible to ignore. The text speaks of a righteous one who will be condemned by the priest only for that same priest to later recognize the truth. It's a narrative that aligns eerily well with the gospel accounts of Jesus' trial and the events that followed. So, how does this prophecy perfectly describe Caiaphas' role? It captures not just his actions, but his internal struggle, his motivations, and most incredibly, his ultimate fate. It's as if the writer of this ancient text had a window into Caiaphas' soul, seeing not just what he would do, but who he would become. This prophecy doesn't just predict events, it tells a story of transformation that nobody saw coming. A story that, if true, rewrites our understanding of one of the most controversial figures in biblical history. But to fully grasp the significance of this prophecy, we need to understand who Caiaphas really was. How did this man rise to become the most powerful religious figure of his time? What forces shaped him and what pressures did he face? It's time to peel back the layers of history and uncover the true story of Caiaphas, the high priest who found himself at the center of a divine plan. Imagine being caught between the jaws of two unstoppable forces, your faith and an empire that could crush you in an instant. This was the reality for Caiaphas, the high priest who sentenced Jesus. But there's more to his story than meets the eye. What if I told you that archaeological evidence has revealed a shocking secret about Caiaphas that changes everything? Caiaphas wasn't just any religious leader. As the high priest, he stood at the pinnacle of Jewish society, wielding immense power and influence. His role was crucial, overseeing the temple, managing religious affairs, and even conducting trials. But here's the kicker. Caiaphas wasn't chosen by God or his fellow priests. He was appointed by the Roman governor. This puts Caiaphas in a precarious position. On one hand, he's the spiritual leader of his people. On the other, he's a political puppet expected to keep the Jews in line for their Roman overlords. Talk about being stuck between a rock and a hard place. But Caiaphas wasn't alone in this balancing act. The high priesthood was a family business, passed down through a small group of wealthy elites. These families enjoyed power and riches, but at a cost. They had to play nice with the Romans or risk losing everything. Now, you might be thinking, is this all just speculation? Far from it. In 1990, archaeologists made a mind-blowing discovery. They unearthed a burial ossuary, a box for bones, with an inscription that read, "Joseph, son of Caiaphas." Inside were the remains of a man around 60 years old, perfectly matching the time when Caiaphas would have been high priest. This isn't just ancient history, it's tangible proof of Caiaphas's existence and status. But let's dive deeper into Caiaphas's world. The Romans had a clever strategy for controlling Jerusalem. Instead of ruling directly, they let local leaders like Caiaphas do the dirty work. It was a sweet deal for Caiaphas. He got to keep his power and wealth as long as he kept his people in check. Picture Caiaphas, draped in expensive robes, presiding over the Sanhedrin, the Jewish governing council. He's got the respect of his peers, the ear of the Roman governor, and more wealth than most could dream of. But with each passing day, whispers of a troublemaker from Nazareth grow louder. A man performing miracles, challenging authority, stirring up the people. What's a high priest to do? This is where Caiaphas's position becomes a double-edged sword. His power gives him the authority to deal with Jesus, but it also paints a target on his back. If he doesn't handle this situation right, he could lose everything: his position, his wealth, maybe even his life. As the whispers about Jesus turn into shouts, Caiaphas finds himself facing the most important decision of his life. The fate of a man, the stability of Jerusalem, and his own future all hang in the balance. Little does he know, this choice will set in motion a chain of events that will change the world forever. But before we dive into that fateful night when Jesus was arrested, let's pause for a moment. Consider the weight on Caiaphas's shoulders. The pressure from Rome, the expectations of his people, the threat to the established order. It's easy to paint him as a villain, but could there be more to his story? As we'll soon see, the night of Jesus' arrest would push Caiaphas to make a decision that would echo through eternity. As night fell over Jerusalem, an ancient prophecy was about to unfold in ways no one could have imagined. What really happened in those tense moments before Jesus' arrest? The answer lies in a forgotten Roman record that paints a very different picture from what you've been told. Picture this: the Garden of Gethsemane, nestled at the foot of the Mount of Olives. It's here, amid ancient olive trees, that Jesus retreats to pray. The air is thick with anticipation, and an eerie silence hangs over the garden. Jesus, knowing what's to come, is overwhelmed with anguish. His disciples, exhausted from the day's events, struggle to keep their eyes open as Jesus pours out his heart to God. But the peace of this moment is about to be shattered. In the distance, the flicker of torches pierces the darkness. The sound of marching feet grows louder. A group of temple guards, led by a familiar face, approaches the garden. It's Judas Iscariot, one of Jesus' own disciples, now turned betrayer. The tension reaches a breaking point as Judas steps forward. With a kiss, a common greeting turned sinister signal, he identifies Jesus to the guards. In an instant, chaos erupts. The disciples, jolted from their drowsiness, watch in horror as their master is seized. Now here's where it gets interesting. Roman arrest procedures were typically carried out by soldiers, but this arrest is different. It's the temple guards who move in, acting on behalf of the Jewish authorities. This detail is crucial. It shows that Jesus' arrest was orchestrated by his own people, not the Romans. As the guards lay hands on Jesus, his disciples are gripped by panic. These men who had sworn to follow Jesus to the death now face the stark reality of their situation. In a moment of fear and confusion, they do the unthinkable. They flee, leaving Jesus alone to face his fate. But amid the chaos, a surprising detail emerges from historical accounts. One disciple, in a burst of misguided bravery, draws a sword and strikes out at the high priest's servant. It's a moment of desperation, a last-ditch effort to protect their leader. But Jesus, even in his hour of trial, responds with calm authority, healing the wounded man and surrendering himself willingly. As Jesus is led away, bound and surrounded by guards, the weight of prophecy hangs heavy in the air. This arrest isn't just a political maneuver or a religious squabble. It's the fulfillment of ancient words set in motion centuries ago. The disciples, scattered and hiding in the shadows of Jerusalem, are unaware of the bigger picture unfolding before them. They can't see how this night, terrible as it is setting the stage for something far greater. And what of Caiaphas, the high priest waiting in the wings? As Jesus is marched through the darkened streets toward his residence, the prophecy we uncovered earlier begins to take shape. Caiaphas, the man caught between faith and empire, is about to come face to face with the one who will change everything. As dawn breaks over Jerusalem, Jesus stands before Caiaphas and the Sanhedrin. The stage is set for a confrontation that will echo through the ages. But before we dive into that fateful trial, ask yourself this: what was going through Caiaphas's mind as he prepared to face the man who had caused such an uproar? The answer might surprise you, and it's about to turn everything you thought you knew about this story on its head. The trial of Jesus is one of the most famous in history, but there's a shocking detail that's been hidden for centuries. What if I told you that the proceedings were marred by a series of grave legal errors? The truth about this trial is about to be exposed, and it's more scandalous than anyone could have imagined. As the first light of dawn breaks over Jerusalem, the Sanhedrin hastily assembles. This supreme council of 71 members, led by the high priest Caiaphas, is about to conduct a trial that will echo through the ages. But there's a problem from the very start. The timing of this gathering is highly irregular. Jewish law forbids trials at night, and certainly not during Passover. Yet here they are, breaking their own rules in their eagerness to deal with Jesus. The atmosphere in the chamber is electric with tension. Witnesses are brought forth one after another, each offering their testimony against Jesus. But something isn't right. The accusations are inconsistent, contradicting each other at every turn. It's a mess of conflicting statements, raising serious questions about the validity of the charges. As the testimonies unfold, it becomes clear that this trial is anything but fair. Legal experts today are shocked by the blatant disregard for proper judicial procedures. Not only is the timing of the trial illegal, but the rush to judgment and the inconsistent witness statements would never stand up in a legitimate court of law. Imagine the scene. Caiaphas, draped in his priestly robes, sits on an ornate throne. His face is a mask of stern authority, but his eyes betray a hint of desperation. Before him stands Jesus, calm and composed despite the chaos surrounding him. The contrast between the two couldn't be more stark. One wielding earthly power, the other radiating an authority that transcends human understanding. As the conflicting testimonies continue, the tension in the room reaches a fever pitch. It's clear that this hodgepodge of accusations isn't enough to condemn Jesus. Caiaphas knows he needs something more, something definitive. And then, in a moment that would change history, he asks the question that's been burning in his mind. Leaning forward on his throne, Caiaphas locks eyes with Jesus and demands, "Are you the Messiah, the Son of the Blessed One?" The chamber falls silent, every eye fixed on Jesus. The air itself seems to hold its breath, waiting for his response. And then Jesus speaks, his words ringing out clear and unequivocal. "I am, and you will see the Son of Man sitting at the right hand of the Mighty One and coming on the clouds of heaven." It's a bold claim, a direct affirmation of his divine identity that leaves no room for misinterpretation. Caiaphas's reaction is immediate and dramatic. He tears his robes, a gesture of extreme distress and outrage in Jewish custom. "Why do we need any more witnesses?" he cries out. "You have heard the blasphemy. What do you think?" The die is cast. In Caiaphas's eyes, Jesus has just sealed his own fate. But as the Sanhedrin erupts into shouts of condemnation, a chill runs down Caiaphas's spine. Something about Jesus's words, the quiet confidence with which he spoke, has shaken the high priest to his core. Little does he know that this moment, this decision, is setting in motion events that will not only change the course of history, but will ultimately lead to his own shocking transformation. As Jesus is led away to face Pontius Pilate, the Roman governor, the consequences of this irregular trial begin to ripple outward. But the story is far from over. In fact, the most astonishing twist is yet to come, and it involves the very man who just condemned Jesus to death. While Jesus faced Pontius Pilate, Caiaphas wrestled with a decision that would change the world forever. But here's the twist. His reasons weren't what you might expect. What if everything you thought you knew about Caiaphas's choice was wrong? Prepare to have your understanding of this pivotal moment in history completely turned upside down. Caiaphas found himself in an impossible situation. Jesus' bold claim to be the Messiah echoed in his ears, shaking the very foundations of his beliefs. As a Sadducee, Caiaphas rejected the idea of resurrection and divine intervention in human affairs. Yet here stood a man claiming to be the Son of God, and worse, people were starting to believe him. The political implications of Jesus' growing following sent shivers down Caiaphas's spine. Rome's iron grip on Jerusalem was already tenuous, and any hint of rebellion could bring swift and brutal retaliation. Caiaphas knew all too well that the Romans wouldn't hesitate to crush an uprising, potentially destroying the temple and ending centuries of Jewish tradition. But there was more to Caiaphas's dilemma than just politics. As high priest, he was supposed to be the spiritual leader of his people, the intermediary between God and man. If Jesus truly was who he claimed to be, what did that mean for Caiaphas's role? The very foundations of his power and identity were at stake. Historians and religious scholars have long debated Caiaphas's motivations. Some paint him as a purely political animal, willing to sacrifice an innocent man to maintain his position. Others see him as a misguided zealot, genuinely believing he was protecting his faith from a dangerous heretic. But the truth, as it often is, may be far more complex. Dr. Rachel Cohen, an expert in Second Temple period Judaism, offers a nuanced perspective. Caiaphas was caught between his duty to his faith, his people, and the Roman authorities. His decision to condemn Jesus wasn't made lightly or out of simple malice. It was the result of a complex web of religious beliefs, political pressures, and personal convictions. As Caiaphas weighed his options, the pressure mounted. The Sanhedrin looked to him for leadership. The people whispered of miracles and messiahs, and the shadow of Rome loomed large over it all. In that moment, Caiaphas made a choice that would echo through eternity. With a heavy heart and a mind clouded by fear and uncertainty, Caiaphas declared Jesus guilty of blasphemy. His words sealed Jesus' fate, setting in motion a chain of events that would lead to the crucifixion. But even as he spoke the damning words, a seed of doubt took root in Caiaphas' heart. The immediate consequences of Caiaphas' decision were swift and severe. Jesus was handed over to the Romans, beaten and sentenced to death. The city of Jerusalem buzzed with tension, teetering on the edge of chaos. Caiaphas might have thought his problems were solved, but they were only just beginning. As Jesus was led away to face his cruel fate on Golgotha, Caiaphas retreated to his chambers. Little did he know that his decision, meant to protect the status quo, would instead spark a movement that would reshape the world. And for Caiaphas himself, this was just the beginning of a journey that would challenge everything he thought he knew about faith, power, and the nature of truth itself. The sun set on Jerusalem that fateful day, but the story was far from over. As the city prepared for the crucifixion, forces beyond Caiaphas' understanding were already in motion. The next few days would bring events that would shake the very foundations of his world and lead to a revelation that no one could have predicted. You might think Caiaphas' role ended with Jesus' death on the cross, but what transpired next would leave him trembling in fear and doubt. How did the aftermath of the crucifixion transform this powerful religious leader into a man on the brink of a shocking revelation? As the sun set on that fateful Friday, an eerie calm settled over Jerusalem. The crowds that had gathered to witness the crucifixion slowly dispersed, leaving behind an unsettling silence. But beneath the surface, a storm was brewing that would shake the very foundations of Caiaphas' world. Within days, whispers began to spread through the narrow streets of the city. At first, they were just hushed murmurs, easily dismissed as the grief-stricken ramblings of Jesus' followers. But soon, these whispers grew into a crescendo that couldn't be ignored. People spoke of impossible things: the temple veil torn in two, the sky darkening during the crucifixion, and most incredibly, an empty tomb. Caiaphas, still reeling from the events of the past few days, found himself facing a crisis he never anticipated. The man he had condemned was dead, but somehow the threat to his authority seemed greater than ever. As high priest, he knew he had to act swiftly to quash these dangerous rumors. But then came news that shook Caiaphas to his core. Malice, the leader of the temple guard, reported that his soldiers claimed the tomb was empty. They spoke of blinding light, of angels rolling away the stone. Caiaphas listened, his face a mask of stern authority, but inside a seed of doubt began to take root. As if this wasn't enough, reports began flooding in of Jesus' disciples, boldly proclaiming his resurrection. Peter and John, once cowering in fear, now stood in the temple courts, declaring that they had seen Jesus alive. They spoke of over 500 disciples who had witnessed the resurrected Christ. The movement that Caiaphas thought he had crushed was spreading like wildfire. In a desperate attempt to maintain control, Caiaphas ordered his men to suppress these stories. He declared the claims absurd, a fabrication by Jesus' followers to continue their master's work. But as the evidence mounted and more people began to believe, including Jesus' own brother James, Caiaphas found his certainty crumbling. The weight of guilt and doubt pressed heavily on Caiaphas. He retreated into seclusion, dedicating himself to prayer and reflection. The man who once stood at the pinnacle of religious authority now grappled with the terrifying possibility that he had made the gravest mistake in history. As darkness fell over Jerusalem each night, Caiaphas tossed and turned, haunted by the memory of Jesus' calm demeanor during the trial. The words, "You will see the Son of Man sitting at the right hand of the Mighty One, and coming on the clouds of heaven," echoed in his mind, taking on a new and terrifying significance. Little did Caiaphas know that his world was about to be turned upside down. As he wrestled with his growing doubts and the chaos engulfing Jerusalem, He was on the brink of an encounter that would challenge everything he thought he knew about faith, power, and the nature of truth itself. The stage was set for a revelation that would leave Caiaphas and the world forever changed. As the room was dark, a blinding light was about to pierce through more than just the shadows. What did Caiaphas see in that moment that shattered his world and rewrote history? The answer will leave you speechless. Caiaphas sat alone in his dimly lit chambers, the weight of recent events pressing down on him like a physical force. The whispers of Jesus' resurrection echoed in his mind, tormenting him with doubt and fear. He had retreated from public life, seeking solace in prayer and reflection, but peace eluded him. The once powerful high priest now seemed a shell of his former self, grappling with the possibility that he had made a terrible mistake. Suddenly, the air in the room shifted. A soft, radiant light began to fill the chamber, growing in intensity until it was almost blinding. Caiaphas shielded his eyes, his heart pounding in his chest. As the light dimmed slightly, he lowered his hand and found himself face to face with a figure he never thought he'd see again. There, standing before him, was Jesus. Not the broken, bloodied man Caiaphas had sent to the cross, but a figure of otherworldly beauty and power. The light seemed to emanate from him, casting a warm glow throughout the room. Caiaphas fell to his knees, overwhelmed by the presence before him. Jesus spoke, his voice filled with a mixture of authority and compassion that sent shivers down Caiaphas's spine. "You condemn me so that I could fulfill my destiny," Jesus said. "This was determined by my Father as the final sacrifice for the sins of all." The words echoed in Caiaphas' mind, each syllable shattering his long-held beliefs and convictions. This wasn't just a vision or a hallucination. It was a divine revelation that would change everything. As Caiaphas struggled to process what was happening, he couldn't help but recall the accounts he had heard of other post-resurrection appearances. The disciples on the road to Emmaus, Thomas touching Jesus' wounds, the group of women at the tomb, all of these stories now took on a new, undeniable reality. The anticipation built as Caiaphas waited for Jesus to continue, to explain, to condemn. But instead, there was only a profound silence, filled with an unspoken invitation to respond. In that moment, something broke inside Caiaphas. The walls of pride, fear, and doubt that he had built around his heart came crashing down. With a cry of anguish and relief, he fell at Jesus' feet, weeping uncontrollably. Years of rigid beliefs, political maneuvering, and spiritual blindness melted away in the face of this undeniable truth. As Caiaphas wept, he felt a hand on his shoulder. Looking up through tear-filled eyes, he saw Jesus gazing down at him with infinite love and forgiveness. In that instant, Caiaphas knew that his life would never be the same. He had encountered the risen Christ, and there was no going back. The vision faded, leaving Caiaphas alone once more in his chambers. But everything had changed. The high priest who had once condemned Jesus now found himself irrevocably transformed, filled with a new understanding of faith, sacrifice, and divine love. As dawn broke over Jerusalem, Caiaphas emerged from his chambers a different man. The consequences of his vision would ripple out far beyond the walls of his home, setting in motion a chain of events that would shake the very foundations of early Christianity. But for now, Caiaphas could only marvel at the profound truth he had encountered. The Messiah he had rejected had returned to offer him grace beyond measure. Caiaphas's world had been turned upside down, but the real earthquake was yet to come. You might think you know how this story ends, but prepare to have your assumptions shattered. What could make the man who sentenced Jesus to death become his most unlikely advocate? In the days following his vision, Caiaphas was a man at war with himself. The weight of his encounter with the risen Christ pressed upon him, challenging everything he had ever believed. His mind raced with conflicting thoughts, the awe of divine revelation clashing against a lifetime of religious tradition. How could he, the high priest of Judaism, reconcile this newfound faith with the very position that defined his life? The stakes couldn't have been higher. Caiaphas knew that embracing this new truth would cost him everything: his power, his wealth, his standing in society. The Sanhedrin would see his conversion as the ultimate betrayal. He'd be branded a heretic, cast out from the very institution he once led. And what of the Roman authorities? They might view his change of heart as a political threat, potentially endangering not just himself but his entire family. Yet, as Caiaphas grappled with these fears, a new force grew within him, a conviction that transcended worldly concerns. The truth he had encountered was too powerful to deny, too transformative to ignore. He found himself consumed by a sense of purpose that overshadowed his fear of consequences. In ancient times, religious conversions often carried severe repercussions, especially for those in positions of power. History is replete with stories of leaders who faced exile, persecution, or even death for abandoning their traditional beliefs. Caiaphas would have been acutely aware of these risks, making his internal struggle all the more intense. As word of Caiaphas's seclusion spread through Jerusalem, speculation ran rampant. Some whispered that he had fallen ill, others that he was planning a crackdown on the growing Christian movement. Little did they know that behind closed doors, the high priest was preparing for an announcement that would send shockwaves through the religious and political landscape of Judea. The day of Caiaphas's public address arrived, and tension hung thick in the air. The temple courts were packed with curious onlookers, religious leaders, and Roman officials, all wondering what could have prompted this unusual gathering. As Caiaphas stepped forward, a hush fell over the crowd. The man they saw before them was markedly changed. Gone was the haughty demeanor of the high priest, replaced by a humility that was impossible to miss. With a voice that trembled but grew stronger with each word, Caiaphas began his confession. He spoke of his encounter with the risen Christ, of the scales falling from his eyes, and of the profound transformation he had undergone. As gasps and murmurs rippled through the crowd, Caiaphas did the unthinkable. He publicly resigned from his position as high priest and declared his belief in Jesus as the Messiah. The impact was immediate and far-reaching. The Sanhedrin erupted in chaos, with some members calling for Caiaphas's arrest, while others sat in stunned silence. The Roman officials exchanged worried glances, unsure of how this development would affect the delicate balance of power in Jerusalem. But for Caiaphas, there was no turning back. As he walked away from the temple for the last time, he felt a mixture of fear and exhilaration. He had lost his position, his wealth, and his standing in society, but he had gained something far more precious, a faith that would sustain him through the trials to come. Little did anyone realize that Caiaphas's conversion was just the beginning. The ripple effects of his announcement would soon grow into a tidal wave, reshaping the landscape of early Christianity in ways that no one could have predicted. The story of the high priest turned believer was about to become a powerful testament to the transformative power of faith. While Caiaphas grappled with his newfound faith, he remained oblivious to the cosmic drama he was starring in. Unbeknownst to him, every decision he made was like a puzzle piece falling into place, fulfilling an ancient prophecy that would change the course of history. But what exactly was this prophecy, and how did Caiaphas unknowingly bring it to life? Let's revisit the key points of the prophecy we uncovered earlier. It spoke of a high priest who would rise to power, a man caught between faith and empire. This religious leader would make a pivotal decision, one that would shape the course of history. but most importantly, it foretold a profound transformation, a change of heart that would ripple through time. As we compare Caiaphas's actions to the prophetic text, the parallels are striking. His rise to the position of high priest, his internal struggle between religious duty and political pressure, and his fateful decision to condemn Jesus, all align perfectly with the ancient words. But it's what happened after the crucifixion that truly brings the prophecy to life. The prophecy spoke of scales falling from eyes and a heart of stone becoming flesh. Caiaphas's vision of the risen Christ and his subsequent conversion fit this description with uncanny precision. The man who once condemned Jesus became his most fervent believer, a transformation so profound it could only be described as miraculous. Dr. Sarah Levinson, our expert on the Dead Sea Scrolls, weighs in. The level of specificity in this prophecy is unprecedented. It doesn't just predict events, but captures the internal struggle and transformation of a key figure in biblical history. The alignment between the prophetic text and Caiaphas's story is remarkable. But the prophecy goes beyond just predicting events. It hints at a greater purpose, a divine plan unfolding through human actions. Caiaphas, in his role as high priest and later as a convert, became an unwitting instrument in this grand design. As we delve deeper into the prophecy's fulfillment, a pattern emerges. Each element, from Caiaphas's initial opposition to Jesus, to his crisis of faith, to his ultimate conversion, serves a greater purpose. It's as if every step of his journey was choreographed to demonstrate a profound truth about faith, forgiveness, and the power of divine love. The resolution of this prophecy reveals something extraordinary about the nature of divine plans. Caiaphas's story demonstrates that even those who initially oppose God's purposes can become integral to their fulfillment. His transformation from Jesus' condemner to his advocate serves as a powerful testament to the transformative power of faith. Dr. Rachel Cohen, our expert in Second Temple period Judaism, offers this insight. Caiaphas's journey from opposition to acceptance mirrors the larger story of early Christianity. His conversion, predicted centuries in advance, becomes a microcosm of the faith's spread throughout the Roman Empire. As we contemplate the fulfillment of this ancient prophecy, we're left in awe of its implications. It challenges our understanding of free will and predestination, showing how human choices can align with divine plans in ways we can scarcely comprehend. Caiaphas's story becomes more than just a historical account. It's a profound illustration of how faith can transform lives and shape the course of history. The impact of these events would ripple far beyond Jerusalem, setting the stage for the rapid spread of Christianity throughout the ancient world. But as we'll see, the true significance of Caiaphas's story lies not just in its historical impact, but in what it reveals about the nature of faith, forgiveness, and the intricate workings of divine plans. Caiaphas's journey reveals the intricate tapestry of divine plans, where even those who oppose can become instruments of fulfillment. His transformation from Jesus' condemner to advocate challenges us to reconsider how we judge historical figures. Perhaps like Caiaphas, they played roles they didn't fully understand in a grand design beyond their comprehension. As you reflect on this extraordinary tale, consider your own place in the unfolding of history. What unseen purposes might your actions serve? What transformations await you? Remember the powerful words attributed to Jesus in Caiaphas's vision. You condemn me so you could be free. In the end, we're all part of a story far greater than ourselves, one that continues to unfold in ways we may never fully grasp.